Justin, hello. Right now,
Gosh.
you're at the New Orleans Investment Conference, and you just saw Jim Rickard's speech, and you're going to kind of give us a nice summary of what was going on.
Yeah, so it was here that Jim and also Daniel DiMartino Booth, they were kind of the big speakers from, along with Dr. Ron Paul and a few other people, but from the geopolitical angle, which is something I find particularly fascinating. And those were kind of the two big names, Rickards taking the lead. And what's interesting is that Rickard's presentation, maybe about 15 minutes long, focused almost exclusively on China. And I guess you could say the net takeaway from it is that he basically called China or in my words, he called China a paper tiger. But to say that slightly differently, he mentioned that there are some very serious structural problems China has right now, particularly with their demographics, that will create issues. We'll go into those in just a second. And the other thing, just to kind of give a bit of history on this, from the little that I understand about history, which isn't much, but with the little I have, I'll do my best to share. The story of China has repeated for, I don't know, the past 1,000 or 5,000 years, or however long it goes back. The point is that it's ancient and it's old, and it's this. If you want to think about China, China's almost an island. Hear me out. So for those who aren't kind of familiar with the area, you have on the eastern side of China, the ocean. So up to the very north, you have Beijing. Kind of in the middle, you have Shanghai at the mouth of the Yangtze. And then at kind of like the southern border, you have it's basically Hong Kong is what you have there. So anyways, north Beijing, Shanghai in the middle, Hong Kong in the south. And what's happened in the past, and when I say past, this is over, thousands upon thousands of years, is that China will open up. When China opens up, the coastal cities become very, very prosperous through trade. But just as the coastal cities will flourish, the inner part of China will languish. And this gets back to my earlier comment about China being an island, because just as they have the ocean on the eastern front, on the western front of China, it's mountains, and it's very, very hard terrain to go through. So technically, yes, I know there's not an ocean, and yes, I know mountains do not equal water. My point is, in order to pass through this stuff, it's actually quite hard. If you think back to the Silk Road, I mean, the key advantage of the Silk Road was it was one of the best ways to navigate a really bad situation. Everyone say navigate across the terrain, otherwise impassable terrain. Anyways, so the point is that China has this cyclical history of the coast becoming wealthy, the inner part of China languishing, and eventually that creates enough social tension where China basically implodes upon itself. Then it becomes very insular, shuts itself off from the rest of the world, and then the cycle repeats over and over and over
So
again.
what happens when after the fact, when the coast gets really wealthy and the inner city really struggles? What happens when you get to peak disparity between the two?
So very good question, Josh. So another dynamic to consider is that also when you get to say this peak delta in terms of prosperity, you also get the peak centralization. And this is something that I kind of had heard before, but Rickards really helped me articulate the thought. And so if you look at China right now, I mean, you and I can just go down the laundry list poorly, and others can do it much better, I'm sure. We talk about, take, the China wanting to launch, the digital yuan, their flavor of CBDCs, which is fundamentally, I would argue, more about control than anything else. And you just go down the list of things, them rolling out the social credit score, the constant monitoring. When COVID was breaking out in December of 2019, I was in Shanghai, going back and forth quite a bit. And even just walking around, there's cameras everywhere. And well, anyways, my point is that it's peak the centralization in China right now is extreme. The other thing Rickards mentioned, and it's probably significant, but I don't have the knowledge
So
of it.
what happens when you get to that peak delta of prosperity?
So
What is the next? What does the next cycle look like?
what happens is that once you go from peak centralization, you have implosion. So implosion means fractionalization, implosion. So what that would mean is you basically have a breakdown of the internal government. So in other words, let's say having a strong federal system, or that's not the correct word to use, but as Americans, you and I will understand that it would basically be the federal system breaking down and the states taking over, or the provinces in China's case. That would be an example of that. Civil war is probably too strong a word to use, but think about mass internal unrest. It would be like the equivalent in the States if the federal government shut down, the states took over. And
Like what happened in March 2020 in the United States, where protests were flooding through the streets, businesses were getting taken over, people were stealing, just like a guerrilla warfare within the people.
that could definitely be part of it. Yeah, that's probably That is a stretch, but it's probably not an unfair stretch
Okay.
to think about it like that.
All right. What other main points was
Oh,
Jim
so
Rickards
the
talking
other
about?
thing to think about with this, and like I'm surprised Gammon hasn't picked up on this because this would be right up his alley if we wanted to do a video, is talk about the sheer fallacy, lunacy, and arrogance of central planners, because nobody can central plan like a Chinese central planner, but whatever. So the point is that
they're probably the best planners of all the central planners.
Yeah, maybe the best or the worst, or maybe both, maybe both at the same time. In any event, what happened was that, so there are multiple things I can throw out, but let's talk about um, demographics for a second. So for those who aren't aware, in order for a population to remain stable, the average woman needs to have about 2.13 children. So the two children's self-explanatory. You've got mom and a dad, right? You bring them together, the magic happens and the baby comes out or whatever, right? So two of them to realistic parents. But the 0.13, so the 2.13, that's to account for the breakage, because not every child is going to have their own children. Some will, of course, unfortunately die, and so on and so forth. But the point is, that's the magic number of 2.13.
Yeah.
So back in, I should have in my notes, apologies that I don't, but let's just say, I want to say it was maybe
trying to cut that off, and they can only have one child per person. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's what happened. But it's not so much just
that's a big deal right now, right? Because why is that such a big deal?
And it's a big deal for multiple reasons. So number one, what's going on right now is when you look at population is power. Whichever way you want to slice it, population is power. So if you're not having 2.13, or if your fertility rate's not 2.13, your population is going to be declining. You can get around that if you're importing people. I'm looking at you, Europe. But my point is that even if you're importing people, that has its own set of problems, separate video. Let's just return the focus to China. So you have your one child per family type policy. So that basically slashes the natural growth rate of the population. And there's another darker aspect to this as well. When the one child policy was in effect, for various reasons, families preferred to have males over females. That is to say, if the child that came out was female, sometimes you had a post-third trimester abortion, which is a very ugly and grotesque way to say you basically murdered the infant, if it was female. And so what that meant was, not only did you have a slash in population, but you also had a slash of the bottleneck of how population comes in. So here's an amusing story, Josh. Let's just say, for example, it's the old story, like, there's a spaceship, that can only hold 1,000 humans and the planet's going to end. Well, who do you put on the spaceship? Well, you might put, let's say, 700 women and, 300 males. And the reason is that when it comes to, let's say, the baby business, as a male, you and I could probably father a kid, one kid a day, from, let's say, I don't know what, 15 to 90. Not bad work if you can get it. The point is that the bottleneck's not necessarily on the male side; it's on the female side. If a woman starts having kids, when she's, I don't know, let's just say 15, and goes all the way to 45, and assuming she has a kid a year, and there's no twins involved, that's there's no way that a woman can match the amount of children that a guy can put out. And that's just simple economics. And that's, a woman, like, really, my hats off to the lady who can, that's really down to business. But anyways, point is that not only did you have a decrease in the gross number of children that were coming out, but you also were skewing the numbers. So you had more male than females. And if you had less females, if females were the bottleneck in a sense for reproduction, you're taking down the bottleneck, which has a double whammy. It's like buying an options contract, or like buying a put on your population or whatever, right? So the point is that this all rebounds, and when you look at demographics, it's kind of like a slow-moving train wreck, you can see the thing coming a mile away, but because it's not imminent, it's not that people care about it, or like they only care when it's too late. And so what's going on right now is China recently ratcheted, I want to say recently, I think Rickards mentioned back maybe in, let's say, the past decade, strongly encouraged a 2-child per family policy that was quickly raised to a 3-family per child policy. But the point is that if you look at the replacement right now, and this is, quoting Rickards numbers, I can't easily find it, but I'll just give you the takeaway. By 2100, which, I mean, you and I will probably not be alive. Well, you might be. I probably won't be in 2100. But the takeaway is that from China, like, they might be looking at taking their population from, let's say, 1.4, 1.5 billion down to 700 million. That's like half. That's a loss of half.
Yeah, that's a longer term issue with China. That is, if you are looking at this, you have to be looking at it through a long term perspective. I am short term fundamentally bullish on a lot of Chinese companies, and people might be shaking their head like, what? Why? There's so much risks in China. And yes, I understand that, but I'm fundamentally looking at these companies, and I've been thinking about becoming long Chinese tech, the Alibabas, the Tencents. They've gotten absolutely hammered. They're fundamentally great companies growing at exponential rates. There is the risk with the Chinese government, and that's why you have to put your position size on, and with knowing that risk, because there's risks in everything. Some of my favorite companies back in 2020 were Russian equities, and you're not going to put all your money in Russian equities because there's that risk of political environment, but there's risk everywhere. You just have to know how to manage your risk and how to seek the reward.
So that's a fair point, Josh. But again, to kind of channel,
if you're a China bear, and you are a China bear, and I would say I don't know enough. I'm not a geopolitical guy like you, but I agree with the demographics, and that is a big issue. But you have to look at that extremely long term, because people age very slowly. And if you're looking out 50 years, yes, that's a big issue. But if you're trading on a 50-day to 2-year time frame, then there's really not even an issue that I'm looking at or considering.
So there's two things that you might want to, build back in to your thinking on that front that might change your way of it. The first thing is that it is true 2100 is a long time away, and we might not even be alive to see it. But it's also true to say that it won't be everything okay until December 31st of
Yeah.
2099.
I completely agree.
You will quickly run into the outer storms or the outer winds of this coming storm. And the way you can see that right now is go back to the one child per family policy. This is really its head right now, because ultimately, if you have a bunch of guys that, to put it bluntly, aren't getting laid, that will create social tension right now. This will also further exacerbate the very old cyclical problem that China has with the coast getting wealthy and the interior staying poor. That is very much a short-term problem.
I would say that is a much more important issue shorter term, because we can see that the civil unrest really starts to take off when there's a peak divide from the ultra wealthy and the poor. People don't care as much as if they're poor, if people around them are poor. But if they're poor and they see people around them that are extremely rich, that's when people really get angry. And then the food and shelter issue.
There's another issue of the social contract, more on that in a second. But before we get to that, what I would say too is this, and this is, channeling Rickards right here. You're dealing with essentially, let's say, true believers, fanatics, in a sense, communists, whatever, right? They don't like capitalists. And so to think that the motivations that would underpin the financial motivations for like an Alibaba or Jack Ma would be a good example of this. If Uncle Jack, had to disappear for a little bit to go to a re-education center, promoting capitalism is not. Remember how we talked about
I would give you some pushback there. I think China they are taking the Marxist view, and they don't dislike capitalism. I think they need capitalism, and they know they need capitalism. If they look back at Russia during the Lenin era, they are not looking at that Marxist view and saying that's wrong. They're just saying that they didn't get to late stage capitalism, so then their communism could take over. They thought, oh, they didn't let capitalism run its full course before they let communism took over. They jumped the gun. Let's say now China thinks, okay, we've let capitalism hit peak prosperity. Now we, the government, want to take over and then push our communist views, because they're taking that Marxist path. We need capitalism, but now that it's hit its peak, now we're going to use our communism to take over. And I think that's more likely than them disliking capitalism. I would say they're Marxists, from my view.
They're Cain. That's who they are, or the spirit of Cain. And Josh,
right now I'm reading a pretty good book about Cain's, and it's more so about his investing style.
No, sorry, not Cain's. I mean, biblical Cain, as in like Cain and Abel. As in, these people would rather burn down the world than admit they were wrong. See, I think that's the mistake not mistake. That's the miscalculation. Rather than admit they were wrong, even if it meant earning a lot of money or whatnot, right? They would rather burn down the world, burn down their own country than lose power. And I think that's you've got to be real careful about that, because
I think that's about how much pretty much every single country is, because every single person at the top, they care only about power, and they're going to do anything to maintain or increase their level of power.
that is true. But this gets back. Remember how I said, I mentioned the social contract a little earlier. So in rough terms, I would say that the social contract, maybe maybe earlier than this, but if I had to put a date on it, I would say the early 90s, was that the government, that is the Chinese government, would always provide a job. So basically, the government would always guarantee full employment. Like if you want to move to from the farm to the city and work in some shitty factory, okay, great, you can do that or whatever, right? And so kind of in return for that, that was how they kind of, the government always do this, and if the government did this, the people always support the government. That was the contract. That was the bargain. That was the rule. And what happened is that another example, this is Rickards mentioned, and I've talked about this, I think, a little bit with Evergrande and the real estate situation, is that considering the fact that China has a closed capital account, that is to say, if you're a Chinese citizen and you saved up a bunch of renminbi or whatever, right, it's actually relatively hard to get out of the country, and there's not really a lot of investment vehicles you can put your money in. But one of the few things you could put your money in was real estate. And so if everyone starts dumping their money in real estate, and when I say dumping their money in real estate, I mean like their life savings, I mean their 401 or their various flavors of it, like generational wealth. And so it's not so much like, of course, in American or whatever, right? They lose a home. Of course, it's tragic. A real kick in the what's. And hard to bounce back. But it's not necessarily the end of the world. If you, let's say, or if a family lost, maybe the parents' savings, the grandparents' savings, aunts, uncles, or whatever, right? When the property market blows up, that's going to piss people off, like really piss people off. And what's more, if you have it against the backdrop of a wealthy coast and a poor inland, that's just going to, foster a bunch of resentment. Layer that in with a bunch of guys who aren't getting laid because they don't have a woman to going around, and then you're going to have people that are extra pissed off, and the people who always cause problems, as probably it's the role to cause problems, is going to be males, particularly young males who aren't getting laid. That's always the problem children. Well, anyways, get a different video right there. So
this has already been a long video, but I am going to give you some pushback, because I think we could see that exact same thing in the United States. Instead of this is going to be as asset prices as a whole. People are putting all of their money into asset prices, whether it's real estate or the stock market or crypto. And if all of their money is in these asset prices and they come down, then that same type of civil unrest could happen. And then I would say there's that same issue with men not getting laid in the United States, because if you go back to the rational male, women want to date or mate with people who are on their level or above it. And we have men who now, instead of chasing their dreams and trying to be something with their life, they are bums. So women, they don't really have to be doing anything extra. If men are coming down, if they're playing video games, if they're just watching Netflix, if they're just jacking off all the time, they're not going to get laid. And then if their asset prices are going down with that, that's going to cause civil unrest here as well, I would argue. I think those same issues in China, they are not as extreme, but I could see them as issues in the United States as well, except the man to female ratio.
Okay, that's fair. So here's what I would say to respond to that one, though. Yeah, this video is just going to go over. So sorry, everyone. Like I said, just accept the fact it's Friday night. We have nothing better to do, and neither do you. The point is that when it comes to China, and this is going back to something Rickard said, is like, listen, you've got low income countries, middle income countries, and high income countries. And everyone thought that, and this is when I say everyone thought, let's say about maybe 20 or 30 years ago, the trick was getting countries from the low, let's say, income strata to the middle income strata. So to put some tangibility to that, you get people off, the fields doing subsistence farming, move them into the cities, put them to work in a factory doing assembly, very low level dirty manufacturing. But the point is that raises that raises the GDP per capita. So the average amount someone's making, goes up. Okay, good. It creates momentum, and the momentum from that carries the country from, the middle level to the high level. That's what was thought, but that has also been proven wrong, or at least if it hasn't been proven wrong, it certainly looks even weaker and weaker by the day. So what does this have to do with the United States versus China in this regard? The Chinese, fundamentally, they're not creative. All they can do is receive and duplicate. They can't really think outside the box. They can sure copy, they can sure rip off intellectual property, but all that they really can do is, put the shit together, when, they're told how to do it. And you contrast that with the United States or even Europe, where you have kind of, let's say, the pristine, high level, sexy jobs, the ones that actually create value. So this would be the development of how to build. I mean, I'll pick on Tesla for a second. Having Tesla building cars, and then let's say they over automate, or they're able to get the automation, with more robots, or whatever, right? So the point is they can do more and more and more stuff versus just, this, part A goes in slot one, et cetera, type stuff, which is what the Chinese can do. So what I would say is that if you're looking at the collapse, or if you're looking at, some, major blow up of the system, it is true wherever that happens, people are going to be pissed off, and rightfully so. I mean, if you look back in time to Greece, look back in time to Iceland, look back in time to Cyprus, or even to, the EU, but again, different time. I'm going to say that for a different video. I think the point is, and this is a very long-winded way of saying that you are correct, Josh, in saying the risk lies everywhere, including the United States. But to the United States, I think, great advantage, if the risk happens and we have to rebuild ourselves kind of from the ground up, I think the United States is in a much better position to bounce back. To be clear, yes, it will be painful. Yes, it will suck. But at the end of the day, I think we can get through it. And I think when we do build back, forgive me, I think we'll build back better. And I think, yeah, Schwab, whatever, off to the side. Like, I actually think that that's going to be a net improvement.
I sure hope so. And I have been getting more and more optimistic about the United States. I was extremely upset, and I was thinking the world was ending. I have to get the F out of the United States. We're going to see an Australian type of takeover where everyone's just going to submit mask. If one mask you'll get detained. You need at least 6, a hazmat suit, 4 vaccines on you at all times, papers to hand to every single store that you go into. And it seems like people may actually think critically. Or at least they can sniff the BS that a lot of these central planners are throwing.
One of the things, yeah, Josh, I would say that. I will just also note in passing, I was quite pleased. Like when the conference first started, people were reluctantly wearing their mask, and like by the end, it's just like, oh, even the hotel staff was like, "We're so done with this." But like, everyone was like, "Put it on." Like, it was just, yeah, that was done.
And people, if you want a mandate for medicine, or a mandate to wear masks, you need to think about the consequences. What is wrong with mandating someone to put a foreign substance into their body or forcing them to wear a mask? You can say it is protecting people. And sure, it may protect people, which it actually doesn't, and we can see that scientifically. But let's say it does protect people. Why is that wrong? And I would argue it is wrong because you are taking away the human rights of somebody to choose if they want to do something. If you are going to force someone to do something, you are then, I would argue that you are taking away their human rights. And what have we seen in history? What happens when someone's human rights get taken away? Slaves, or in the way back when people their human rights got taken away, and then they were forced to they did not have the choice to work for somebody. They were forced to. Or Nazi Germany, where they were forced to go into concentration camps because they were viewed upon as the enemy. Or any example where somebody gives up their human rights, the government comes in and takes everything away from them. They force them to do anything they please. Like we see in Australia right now. And I don't know how someone in Australia can see this happening and not rebelling instantly. It is just absolutely incredible to me. So we've gone on forever. Do you have any final thoughts or to push?
Oh yeah, we're gonna keep going on forever. This is gonna be a long video.
I'm fine with that because no one's watching anyway.
Yeah, there we go. So what I would say, there's 2 things that come to mind. Like with you, I just look at the Aussies and I'm thinking to myself, do you guys even have, should we say, your male bits anymore, or have you been completely emasculated? That would be my first question. I would also add, as a quick remark, that the reason people comply with these rules is because they think it will get back to normal. But in reality, their compliance is the very thing that underwrites the rules to begin with.
Yeah.
Now,
there is never ever going to be a time where we go back to the old normal. This is the new normal.
Yeah, and let me just add on that for like the thing is, I think life is about going forward, not necessarily going back. And so, like again, like I hate to I won't use the phrase, but I do think that we put on big boy pants. We say, okay, well, listen, okay, we've had a bum rap as a world, whatever, right? But you want to know what? We're adults. We can get through this. We can think our way through it. Sure, it might be annoying. Sure, there's going to be some pain, but you want to know what? We can do better in the future, and we will do better. So I think that's a very good approach to that. Second thing I would add is this: is that when it comes to the best slaves are people who don't even think that they're slaves, okay? And there are a lot of people, I think, right now who fall into that category where they just want to be governed. They want to be governed harder.
God, that is such a true statement, but I don't even think people are thinking they want to be governed harder. They're just saying, what's the big deal? Get the shot, put a mask on, so what? That's not impacting my life. Justin, it's what is putting a mask on? How does that doesn't hurt you? What is getting a shot? That doesn't hurt you. Justin, what pushback would you give to that?
Oh, well, what I would say is this is where you have the B-roll of what is it? You will wear the mask, you will eat the bugs, you will live in the pod, you will take the jab, you will own nothing, and you will be happy. Well, I mean, the way I would say, depending upon the argument or what I was trying to get out of it, the way I talk about vaccines, and this is honestly the way I feel, is that I'm glad that they're there. I'd rather have the option than not have the option. If Justin was, in his 80s with medical conditions, I'd probably have a different take on it. But it gets back to the key thing, and this is, I think, your point, is that, people have the right to choose. Try to find the information, and yes, you'll never have all the accurate information, but you do the best with what you've got. You do a risk-reward analysis, and bam, there you go. So be it. So be it. I think that the other thing that goes through with where we're at right now, and this is actually something, if I had a chance to have more of a long conversation with Gammon, this is something I would push back with him on, because it's not that I disagree with him, but I don't think Gammon's grasp the seriousness of the problem. Here's what I mean by that. It is a noble cause to try to wake people up, absolutely. I feel it's like the doctor, going to the patients, saying, hey, listen, you need to stop eating the quadruple cheeseburgers. You need to stop drinking the scotch. You need to stop smoking the cigars. Get your ass to the gym. By all means, do that. And you want to know what's going to happen? Ain't nobody going to do it. Yeah, maybe one or two might, but the vast majority won't do that. They need to have the come to Jesus moment. And this is the tragedy of life, is that only when your fat ass patient is being rolled into the emergency room for a quadruple bypass surgery that he probably won't survive, only then, when it's too late, will the person finally realize in his heart of hearts, well, maybe I need to change. This is the Owl of Minerva, and I said in a funny way. And so in a sense, I would say rather, by all means, try to wake people up, go for that. That is a noble endeavor. You will make yourself a better person by doing it. And that alone, I think, is justification for it. But at the same time, too, the way I would play it, if I was given, the social planning, is I would not try to wake people up per se. I would actually try to accelerate it. My attitude is, okay, listen, I want to open up, all the fast. It's like the doctor that did the heart attack drill in Vegas. I would try to accelerate it, because I think only when you push people to the edge, see, here's the thing, Josh, until we get to the edge, and when we are looking at the cliff and we are staring over the cliff into the abyss, only when we get to this point will we, as a society or as a culture, find the will to change. Or one of two things I think will happen. Either we will decide we want to jump over the cliff and, live the next 1,000 years in darkness, whatever fresh hell that entails. Or we will say, listen, we need to change. We've had our come to Jesus moment. We need to go do something else. Yeah. But my point is that until you get to the cliff, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's going to be very hard, I think, to make a meaningful change one way or the other. So my argument is accelerate. The sooner we get to the cliff, the sooner we can make a decision. And the sooner we make a decision, the sooner we can figure out, whether we're going to be on the road to hell or the road to heaven. Hopefully the latter, not the former.
All right, Justin, I think that is a great way to end it.
Yeah, very uplifting on that happy note.